Business Security Weekly is recorded on Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Each week, we address the challenges facing CISOs through our guest interviews, including former and active CISOs. Our news segment is focused on leadership and communication to better help security leaders translate and communicate security risks into business risks. Jason Albuquerque, Ben Carr, Tyler Robinson, and others add their expertise to the conversation. I'm Matt Alderman, and I hope you search for Business Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher and subscribe to download our latest content.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Let's see. I do have an announcement to read on the show. I'm stalling because I forgot to push a button. Join us at an upcoming official cybersecurity summit in a city near you. This series of one-day, invitation-only, executive-level conferences are designed to educate senior cybersecurity professionals on the latest threat landscape. We are pleased to offer our listeners a $100 off admission when you use the code SECWEEK23 to register. Visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity summit to learn more and register today. We've added Mr. Lee Neely to the show. Lee, welcome.
Excuse me, it's good to be here. I'm still trying to figure out why my friends in sports tell me they have to go to New Jersey to get their uniforms repaired. Strange,
Jesus Christ, Lee.
Did someone make a dinging sound? Oh, that was right on time. That's great. We were talking about infrared stuff. And I wanted to, with the Usenix conference has published like 40 or 50 papers that represent the accepted submissions to the Usenix conference happening this summer. And I went through, I found a couple of interesting ones. One was really cool that I would like to see the talk on this very much so. And this is called Home Spy. The invisible sniffer of infrared remote control of smart TVs. So their research I thought was interesting. They say it re-examines the general belief that clicking an IR remote control is a homely and safe thing to do. So they created Home Spy, an attack and evaluate the performance using test data received from an IR code base. And basically, they said that attackers can uniquely reproduce the key pressed by the victim and derive sensitive information via semantic extraction techniques. I thought this was kind of interesting. So basically, they're saying if you listen to IR, I think one of the things in the paper it said they were actually kind of surprised how much the range was greater than they expected in infrared transmission. And my whole thing was like, what do you get from sniffing IR? Well, it turns out there's some sensitive information. Things like passcodes and passwords are being entered over infrared, and they're able to derive what those values are in certain circumstances, according to the paper. It's really cool. I don't know how you secure it, though. How do you secure an ancient protocol like infrared? Is it even is it a protocol? Would you call it a protocol? I guess it's a protocol.
Yeah, IRDA is a protocol.
Yeah, IRDA. Yes, is the protocol. I haven't read through the entire paper, but I had questions, and I read enough to like somewhat answer some of my questions about it. Like, what kind of data do you actually get from sniffing IR? I forget exactly the examples that they have in here, what they were able to obtain by sniffing IR in a home environment where, I mean, there's a lot of IR. I control speakers, air purifiers, air conditioners, of course, all your TVs are all infrared.
But
okay, I'm going to say it. Are there any sex toys that are IR controlled?
I don't own any that are IR controlled.
Just checking.
That I know of.
I think
Larry?
we need to get RenderMan on the line.
Yeah,
probably.
Nowadays,
Larry?
Bluetooth.
I'm sorry, what?
Larry, you stepped out for a moment. We're talking about sex toys that are infrared controlled. Do you know of any?
Yeah,
So-
I mean, there's a bunch in your drawer in the office.
That's right. The ones I keep here in the office for purely research purposes.
Yes.
Those are for research.
I have not heard of any that are IR controlled. You figured that the IR signals might be blocked by various body parts and so forth, but I'm just speculating.
I love that you analyzed that technically, and I knew you would, and I had to. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, so here it is. The results show, this is a quote from the paper, the results show that lots of sensitive information could be leaked out through the sniffed IR control signals, including account name and password, PIN code, and even payment information.
Yeah, if you have a Roku, you get your whole credit card number.
Really?
And that's transmitted over
IR?
Yep.
Yeah, but how do you if the
enter
keyboard is
using-
on the screen, if the keyboard's on the screen though, and you're navigating and just pushing select on a particular character or digit, how does it know which one, or is it just transmitting the select button?
Or does this only apply if you're using an IR device that's sending the keystrokes? It's like it's an IR keyboard or
Right.
credit card reader or something. Because I could see grabbing all that stuff if it's being sent over the IR signal, because it's generally not encrypted. And so you could grab it.
Some of the infrared remotes have, or those are usually Bluetooth that have the keyboard on the back.
Right.
I have a couple of those at home.
But that's the scenario where you would for sure want to be worried. I mean, if it's all up, down, left, right, channel numbers, not a lot of there to capture, but something with a keyboard is be much more interesting.
I did have a Samsung remote that came with a Samsung TV that had a keyboard on the back side of the remote.
Apparently, they can read it if you use the on-screen keyboard. They read the IR signal, introduce the keys from it. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Ooh.
Now I have to go through and read the
That would be
paper in more
interesting.
detail. That's new. That's actually kind of exciting.
Well, they're deducing it. It's not a one-to-one connection, but I mean, this is not that much harder than deducing key presses from the radio emitted by the keyboard. They've just discovered what pattern of IR is associated with which character.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see what you're saying, because if you know the keyboard is on the screen, you know that you have to go down 2 times and right 2 times and push select, and that's an A. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're figuring it out.
Yeah.
You're building a map.
Jesus, that's sort of like Proto Tempest.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's like, I didn't think of that. That's really awesome.
No, I never thought of that either. Whenever you're using those IR things, I think, does IR go through Windows? It's probably not contained inside your house even.
No, I don't think so. I think it goes through Windows.
No, it does go through Windows, because
Definitely.
my friend Bob used to walk past his neighbor's houses with the TV be gone and turn off their televisions.
Well, you could really use this in a pen test. You could just stick some kind of receiver outside and get the information.
That's cool.
That's pretty awesome. I was thinking you'd have to sneak something into the house, but maybe not.
Let's see, Sam, you had some, one that I wanted to, there's some new attacks. I think there's at least 2 that I think both you and I had flagged. Oh, well, there's the one where Intel hired Google to hack their, basically it's like a containerization technology on chip, on Xeon processors, which you would think that hyperscalers and cloud providers would have a collective vested interest in making sure that virtualization, essentially, that they're putting on chip actually provides some containment, which is what Intel's, what was the technology? Trusted domain extensions, or is that a different story?
Yeah, that's it, TDX.
Yeah, TDX.
And it has I found an article that explains what TDX is, which is really pretty awesome, specifically for virtual machines, and I think for the cloud. So it isolates virtual machines from the hypervisor, and it includes something called secure arbitration mode and total memory encryption and remote attestation designed to provide evidence that it's executing on genuine hardware.
Oh, interesting.
Sounds like a very good product to really secure your virtual machines, but of course they found flaws in it. The two main flaws they found are one where there was some leftover legacy code they had forgotten to remove in the cryptography engine that was weak, and the other was a race condition in the authenticated code modules. There was a small window in which an attacker could hijack the mechanism to execute malicious code. So Google caught those, and they patched. So it does sound pretty good. And these are all a lot like Spectre and Meltdown. You know, they're subtle ways for information to leak out.
And what I thought was really astonishing about this project was Google evaluated the code before it was shipped.
Right.
So no one has a processor that has these vulnerabilities because they said, you know what? Intel's like, before we ship these chips and this technology, we're going to let Google do the security review. We're going to fix all of the stuff that Google finds, and then we're going to ship the chips. So not one CVE was produced or created for this project.
Kudos.
I think it's
Massive kudos to them for doing that.
Right?
Yeah, I think
cool.
it's maturing. We're actually like detecting things before they ship and patching them. There was recently where I've been quoting this number for years, how the average dwell time when somebody hacks into a company is like 270 days. And that's not true anymore. The median dwell time is now down to like 12 days. So, you know, our industry really is improving.
Yeah, this is definitely evidence of that, Sam. I agree. And I kind of liked how Intel hired Google to do the audit.
Are we allowed to say that our industry is improving and maturing? I thought we were all like, you know,
we should be curmudgeon
disrespecting everybody in our industry and going, they suck. They don't do the fundamentals.
Get off my lawn.
Raison d'etre, you know?
There's cheap stuff that does everything wrong, like the IoT stuff, but the serious enterprise level stuff seems like it's really getting better.
In certain areas, for sure.
Not in firmware, though. Not in firmware.
Well, this is at the micro. Is this a microcode level? Sounds like this technology is at the microcode level. So,
yeah. So I think the firmware is going from zero security up to the first level. I mean, nobody thought about it before.
And there was another side channel attack on Intel CPUs. Transient execution. A new side channel attack on Intel CPUs.
Yeah, that's the one that's like Spectre and Meltdown.
Yes. They said it was like Spectre and Meltdown, except for one thing. Where is my article on it?
It doesn't rely on the cache system, so it may be difficult to detect and mitigate.
It said, instead of relying on the cache system like many other side channel attacks, this new attack leverages a flaw in transient execution that makes it possible to extract secret data from user memory space through timing analysis. That's interesting.
And they're able to get 100% success leaking data out of the Intel Core i7. So that stuff is out there, deployed and vulnerable. So
correct. And
that's Spectre and Meltdown.
We were talking about this. I forget where I was talking about this, but why people don't. Oh, it was on the Below the Surface podcast. We had a couple of conversations about microcode updates. Data that I have that I presented at ShmooCon was that people are not applying microcode updates. We frequently find when we analyze some pretty large data sets in the enterprise, right? I'm talking about enterprise, not on the consumer side, but on the enterprise, there was a lot of missing microcode updates. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one, people don't want to apply the patch because it could have negative performance consequences. I also think that there's a supply chain issue, and Brian Richardson was talking about this. There's a supply chain issue where how do you get the microcode updates down to your Intel CPU? Oftentimes that has to come through your OEM manufacturer that bundles that microcode update with a UEFI update. So if they don't do that, or they're not providing UEFI updates for that hardware anymore, you don't get your microcode update.
That would imply that there are manufacturers that abandon their hardware. I mean, come on, that never happens, right?
Every single one of them at some point.
Manufacturers that go out of business or I don't know what you're talking about. That just doesn't happen in the real world.
I've never put on a microcode update. What would that look like? I put on BIOS updates.
It comes with your BIOS. It comes with your BIOS update. Yeah. Because it has to have a higher level of privilege in order to, I think Intel CSME ME is involved in that transaction, and there's definitely cryptographic validation of your microcode updates. That is a key that I believe is fused onto the CPU itself that does the validation for that microcode update.
Are there attacks in the wild exploiting vulnerable microcode?
That's a good question. I'm off the top of my head not aware of any. I could be wrong, though.
Could you even do it remotely? Would you need physical access?
Well, I think it attacks the way the CPU works in general. So as long as I don't think you need a higher level of privilege, because the microcode is controlling the behavior of the CPU. So as long as you can influence the behavior of the CPU, and a kernel does that, so.
Yeah, I'm just thinking it won't be a priority to patch it until there's actually real exploitation in the wild.
Certainly something I think you need to get ahead of and make sure that you're on top of. Not the highest priority thing you probably have to worry about, microcode updates, but certainly something that, well, also like if you're not applying your EFI updates, that also means you're lagging behind on other stuff as well. So it's kind of indicative that you're not applying those UFI updates. Oh, while we're on the topics of like kernels and chips and stuff, Spectral Chicken. This is kind of like one of my funny stories of the week. It's really not security related, but I just couldn't resist because it's so friggin' awesome. So there is a Linux, in the Linux kernel code, there's like some drama around AMDs. And basically I think there's a small piece of code, I believe, that is controlling some of AMD's kind of Spectre meltdown-ish speculative execution features. And I guess like the backstory is AMD didn't publish like full details, so Linux kernel hackers had to, kind of figure out how it works. And so basically it's hard to follow. You can read the article, but a former AMD engineer who is now again an AMD engineer proposed a change to Linux kernel that the original code was made by an Intel engineer, but then got denied because the Intel engineer is a Linux kernel maintainer still today. And that is why there's a snippet of code that I believe it's in the comments or it's the actual, like in the header file defined as Spectral Chicken will live forever. And the proposed change, by the way, was just a change to the name. To name it something more of what it is, like AMD, speculative execution, blah, blah, blah. And the current Linux kernel maintainer, who now also happens to work for Intel, is like, no, this you get punished because he says next time AMD can try again, and if they manage to get their act together and publish something before I get to write the code and invent a name for a magical bit, they get to name it how they like. So it's like total like sticking fingers right in the eye in kernel land. That's some of the nerdiest drama ever, actually.
Get off my lawn, kid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to make it even more nerdy, Paul, you said that the intent of Spectral Chicken was to prevent speculative execution.
Right.
There's some comments in the article that state towards the pictures of the chickens there that would it be likely that someone would be writing code against like this, like that again? And it was no, but it's purely a speculative assumption.
It's a speculative, yes. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? It's purely speculative.
Right.
So there's your nerdy drama for the week. I guess
gotta love it.
Along lines of kind of nerdy drama, Debian did fix a secure boot for 64-bit ARM after being broken for 2 years. And I think from reading this article, reading the bug submission, and reading the entry for the patch, I've deduced that Debian on 64-bit ARM is shipping with a version of Grub 2 that's either not in the DB or is in the DBX. And they basically just need to update the Grub 2 bootloader to be compatible basically with secure boot. That was my take. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure reading all of that stuff, which goes into laborious detail, but I'm pretty sure that was the issue. So they're fixing that. So if you're on 64-bit ARM and you're running Debian and you can't do secure boot, they're releasing a fix for it.
Well, I've been around for 2 years, but it's okay.
So you're not running secure boot. That's the risk you take.
I mean, it's Debian. Isn't that the right cadence? 2 years?
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
I think Debian and Red Hat have that. We're going to run older, stable proven stuff. Which, I mean,
Spectral chicken.
in some server applications, that's more appropriate to run the more stable stuff. Security-wise, it could help, it could hurt. It's a mixture of both, really, based on what we cover on the show, right?
So, how many
So
folks you
it's-
think are going to go back and enable secure boot?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'd like to think that more people would enable secure boot. I think it gets kind of there's a misconception about secure boot that it's more to protect a physical attack, which certainly not the case. As we saw with Black Lotus, but I think more people should for sure. But a lot of people won't. A lot of people are just, just cause an error, I'm just going to disable it.
I'd like
That's
to
the
talk
thing to
about.
do.
There's
ahead.
Go
the
ahead, Sam.
B-side. This guy wrote up a B-side. Micah Lee wrote up how he solved B-side CTF, and I did that CTF some, and it was a very good one. And he solved the 3 flags with GPT-4, and it was very inspiring. Just like the interview we did earlier about the Flipper Zero convinced me I really need to buy one. This has really convinced me I need to start getting the habit of using GPT-4 instead of just Google for things, because he gave it. I remember I saw these puzzles, like there's a Shamir secret sharing, which is some kind of crypto I don't know anything about, and he just asked ChatGPT-4, and it totally explained it and solved it. So
Do you want
it
the
is,
answer?
yes.
Okay, Shamir secret sharing is a way of splitting a key into multiple parts, thus that you need the greater of the parts. So you can have 3 of 5, 4 of 7, 5 of 9. Effectively, think of Borg. Okay,
That's right.
7 of 9.
Yeah,
Of course.
and so the DNS master key is split up in the same way. Dan Kaminsky used to have one of the pieces. That's
Right.
how he was honored. The DNS master key for all the root servers is split up using Shamir secret sharing, so that should DNS ever die from whatever reason, we can re-enable it by getting enough of those people together when the pieces of paper or flash drives in their sock draws.
Well, that's great. Anyway, this thing, ChatGPT, figured out if he had enough pieces, wrote the Python script to decode it, and just found the flag for him. And then he had another one where you had to use Perl, some kind of Perl compression thing, and it totally figured that out and wrote the Perl script you need. So, and it's very impressive.
I didn't even think of that. I came across something that used some kind of Perl obfuscator, and I had a bitch of a time de-obfuscating it, and I didn't even think to ask ChatGPT. I totally should have. I was like Googling around on the internet trying to find these Perl scripts. I'm like, now I got to install Perl somewhere. Like,
We'll be using it before we use Google. I've got to have it.
You're absolutely right.
So a couple of things that I've learned last week about ChatGPT that I thought have been pretty fun. So ChatGPT has the learned language model, and the last language that it accepted was somewhere, I want to say October last year. There's a cutoff date for where it knows about new things on the internet. If you ask it questions about things that happened after that date, it will give you an answer, and it will lie to you, and it will lie to you convincingly.
Oh, yes. It hallucinates.
That's known as a hallucination. That's the hallucinations. Yeah.
It'll also angrily lie to you more if you question it.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The second one that I learned was that it says it has no access to the internet, so that it can't go and get things from the internet and so forth, which it also lies about. Because if you start a chat and you need to give it some background information about, say, a brand new protocol that was released a couple of weeks ago that was past the cutoff, if you give it a URL to the specification, hey, for some background, the specification located at this URL is what I'll be asking you some more questions on. It will go and retrieve it and analyze it. So despite it telling you it doesn't have access to the internet, it does.
But I think it will not learn from that and remember it. I'm not sure, but I think that's the point.
It will learn from it, but it will
I'm
only
currently having an
learn
argument
from it.
about that.
Yeah, it will only learn from it in the context of that individual chat. I don't know that
Wrong.
it will train the
Wrong.
model.
Sorry, Larry. I gotta push back on you. The user agreement for ChatGPT states that they can use, as long as you have a free account, they can use your data for anything. And I will remind you that ChatGPT 3 released 3 months ago now, with 560 gigabytes of training data, which took them a long time to put together. ChatGPT 4 released 2 months after ChatGPT 3 with 1.7 terabytes of textual data, which is a lot of friggin' text, more than roughly 3 times the original ChatGPT 3. And it was released in only a couple of months. Where do you think they got that training data? Remember, your free account says that you are the product.
Yeah, but it's time, though. It takes time for it to learn.
No, they had a data breach. Try again. They found out that data did get stored.
Yeah, but it takes time for the algorithm to learn what you've given it. If you give it a paper that it hasn't analyzed, how long would it take ChatGPT to incorporate that into its algorithm? In other words,
About
as
3
fast
seconds.
as it takes to read it.
Okay, so there's no learning training time as it gets new data. Like it can constantly assimilate. Well, that's a really bad word to use in this context, but it can constantly assimilate and learn as it goes, basically.
Yeah, basically, yes.
Josh, the only one that I will state here that's a little different in that I'm using a paid account, so whether or not that has any differences between the paid and the free, that might be different. But arguably, if I started a different chat, it was my understanding is that, so I have that one chat about protocol XYZ, and I gave it some reference material. If I went to a new chat, it had no concept of what protocol XYZ again. I would have to train that individual chat model with that data again.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Understanding.
It takes eventually, Larry, you'd be able to ask it, and it would have incorporated that. And I think there's a time gap. I'm not sure what that time gap is, or if it differs between free and paid.
Yeah, the biggest one to grab out of that is it says it can't access the internet. It can.
It can.
There's an article that just came out today in the Register showing how you can go in the settings and you can turn off remembering what you say. So it will not remember or learn from what you do. It's on by default, but you can turn it off.
Even in a free account?
What's that?
In a free account? Is that free?
Yeah, they've introduced the ability to turn off chat history in ChatGPT. Users go to settings and talk the button to turn off chat history. It doesn't say whether it's free or pay accounts. I think it's all accounts.
Yeah, but is that just the history that you're seeing in your account? Like it's really taking in your data. It's just not storing it in your account for you.
Well, no. Supposedly, this will conversations that are started when chat history is disabled won't be used to train and improve our model.
Okay.
Won't appear in the history sidebar.
Gotcha.
So they're aware, and you can turn it off. But I guess it is on by default.
I mean, don't we want it? Don't we want it to get better? I think it's really cool, Sam. Going back to your story, that it can solve problems in a CTF, and why wouldn't you use it for that?
Well, the question is if you're putting in like confidential company data or something.
Yeah, I got you.
And by the way, the stability, which has the open source engine, I looked into that and I tried to run it in a free Google Colab, and it won't with the free account because it needs too much memory. But they do have an online demonstration, and it is very good. They say
so you can have your own instance of it?
You can make your own instance.
Absolutely. There's open source large language models all over the place. The training data is actually the tough part.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can absolutely do that. There's people doing that all over. I'm sorry, Sam, go ahead.
It's actually very easy. And they have 3 billion and 7 billion parameters up, which seem to be as good as GPT-3, I guess, and a bunch more coming. So, and the code is like 50 lines of code. That's all. It's unbelievable.
Really?
I wrote a whole CTF that I'm going to start having everyone go through with all these AI models, and none of them are more than like 50 or 100 lines of code. A lot of them are just 20 lines of code. It's ridiculously easy.
Actually, like, have you seen the Google new security program with AI?
No.
It's one of my stories.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry. Well, let's go to your story.
That's okay. I mean, I haven't dived into it very much. I saw it today and figured it was pretty interesting and didn't get it back to it. It was a crazy day.
So the story, I mean, it's basically they took Mandiant Threat Intel, they took the Google Chronicle security operations system, and they took what they're calling Vertex AI to answer the questions. So the Vertex AI is taking the threat intel, looking at security operations, going, do we care Is it something that we care about on our asset inventory, information inventory, whatever? And what's the relevance? What's the exploitability? What's it asks the questions for you. And then when you go, hey, I see that there's a new vulnerability. Yeah, because for us, it's a CVSS 10. It's a real problem. Here's what we need to do. And so it becomes the human face of a threat intel analyst and a security operations analyst merged into one. Which is
security AI workbench.
Terrifying. Yeah, basically.
Security AI workbench. Yep. Security AI workbench. And that was my story number 11. If anybody was interested.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Sounds great.
Let's see. Let's go. While we're on the topic of AI, my story number 1. SSDs are starting to use AI to protect your data from ransomware attacks. I thought this was kind of cool. If the firmware, essentially on the SSD, can do some analytics, predictive analytics or whatever, to go, oh, someone's starting to run a ransomware attack on me, I should probably shut that down. And you got a couple of different options. You can have it just alert you. You can a shields up mode requiring multi-factor authentication for a user to access those protected files, or you can just flip the drive into read only. I thought that was kind of neat. I don't think it should be the only thing you do to protect against ransomware, but certainly having some intelligence on the drive to detect behavior. Now, how it distinguishes ransomware versus I want to encrypt, a whole bunch of files, I'm not sure how it would do that. But it depends on how you configure it as well.
Well, I think it would be easy to spot. I mean, you just anything that tries to encrypt large numbers of files at once should be blocked unless you go through some special approval.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important because ransomware is so deadly, and having defense in depth is great.
Yeah, having it stop on a drive is a great measure, right?
Yeah. I'm worried. I'm scared of ransomware. That's why I started putting antivirus on my Mac. I was thinking, how bad would I be hosed if I got ransomware? And I was thinking it would be really bad.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really take backups of everything that I can easily restore and all that jazz. Part of my stuff would be pretty.
Who was it? Red Canary that put out a Mac monitor?
Yes.
Didn't we talk about that?
We did. Yep.
Yeah.
Now, some will say, well, we could just hack the firmware and turn off this feature, but then someone has to hack the firmware to turn off this feature. So again, I think I always like to think of defense in cybersecurity as your goal should be not to stop everything, but to make the attackers work harder. That's really all you can do. As a goal, you need to be thinking about how do I make the attackers work harder? Because nothing I do is going to be perfect. Nothing I do is going to be impenetrable. But if I can make them work harder, you're winning. And if this is like, well, now I got to make them go into the firmware and modify the firmware on a drive to be able to get around this protection, why not make them do that?
I especially like it because it's not going to be the same as like an enterprise, endpoint protection suite, which would be common and they might be expecting.
Right.
The combination of the two makes it very unlikely that an attacker would really be able to defeat them both unless they're investing a lot of time specifically targeting you.
Correct. Other kind of, maybe we'll save that one for last. Let's talk about the hidden cost of zombie servers. Feed them some brains, maybe. We all know zombie server. And I think this is talking about physical on-premises servers, but it also extends out into the cloud where you have maybe a little more visibility into the billing in a cloud, although it's very difficult to navigate. But you also see this in the cloud too. Like, I spun up that server. I mean, we've all done it, right? Spin up that service, spin up this instance, and oops, I forgot about it. And the way you figure that out is usually billing, right? Especially if it's doing something, you get a pretty big bill. But this also maybe does fly under the radar a little more if it's physically in a data center and it's a zombie server. And we've all experienced this, right? Like, we did the server migration. We went from the old server we built a new server, and the new server's doing the new stuff, and we did the migration, and we're all kind of tired, and we're like, oh, so glad to be done with that project. And yeah, we're gonna turn off the old server. But it's like you have this thing, it's like when you throw away those old cables that you got laying around, and like the next week, that's when you're gonna need one of those cables. I feel like it's the same way when you turn things off in the data center. Like if you turn it off, there's going to be that one thing you forgot about, or that one use case or user, like poor Lee when I turned off some services, and Lee was the victim of that. So don't,
It's like, whoops, what happened?
do as I say, not as I do. And when you do turn things off, make sure you communicate with everyone, right? When you're turning something off, have good communications when you turn it off, so there are no surprises. And there may still be surprises, and I think you just have to prepare yourself from that, because there's a benefit of attack surface reduction and a reduction in cost when you're turning things off.
I mean, remember that there's a lot of people that go, well, let's run them in parallel for a few weeks just to make sure nothing goes wrong.
Correct. Always do that.
And then we'll turn it off. Somebody put a note somewhere.
Yes.
Turn it off in like a month, because everybody takes perfect notes, right?
Mm-hmm. So that's actually the trick, is people forget to finish the decommissioning process, right?
Yep.
So it may not be running the live app anymore, but you've still got that same OS, which is probably frozen in time, in the same app with all its weaknesses and lack thereof frozen in time. I mean, what could go wrong? But nobody wants be the guy that pulls the plug, because bad things can happen.
Right.
Well, I know I learned to never pull the plug. I remember when I was done teaching like Windows 2000, I took down some projects and I got these angry emails. People are still using stuff on my website from 20 years ago, and I've just learned to never take any of it down.
On the other end of the scale, I was in a conference in a class about BCDR, and a person stood up in the back and said, "When do we get to kick some plugs out of the wall?"
I like the enthusiasm.
We all did, and they were kind of like, "No, that's not going to happen."
That's the scream test. You got to do it.
Well, that's the Netflix the monkey thing from, right? It goes around.
Chaos monkey. Chaos monkey.
Chaos monkey. Yeah, chaos. There is a chaos computing, right? Is a thing where you basically purposely introducing operational downtime, if you will, into your services and applications, and then studying and see how it behaves.
Right. So, on a side note that's not in any of our stories, last night I think it was, the Paris data center for Google had a small fire, and the water damage took out the systems in there. And they're saying, we're having a big outage in services here unless you happen to use some geographic availability options on your stuff.
That's one way. That's one way to turn off legacy gear. You set it on fire.
Fill it full of water.
And then fill it full of water. There you go. Make sure it's really off.
Yeah, well, for real, we actually had a guy chime in on the story in the thread it was in about how he was on call for a high-performance computer, and they had a water leak in the roof, and it was coming down like a hose on top of the computer. Fortunately, the computer had solid top and side panels, so no water got in. Wow. It all went away. But that was a close call.
That's
because those things ain't cheap.
I also think there's ways to detect this condition as well. If you're monitoring the network and such, it might be a good exercise, because I think there's a security risk to this, right? We all know like the things that have been sunsetted, but it's still going. Like as attackers, that's where we flock, because like no one's looking here potentially, and it's running older, more vulnerable things that maybe don't have the monitoring capabilities that you have on your production stuff you're actually paying attention to. And so I think monitoring your network for lowest bandwidth, lowest number of connections is a good thing, because that could be indicative that you've got a server that needs to be turned off. Because like if you've moved all services to the new thing, the old things are not going to have the number, like bandwidth or number of connections going to them, and that should be something you pay attention to.
I just had a scary thought. Hey Larry, have you ever audited your collection of virtual machines that you've got hanging out on disk?
Yeah, actually, just the other day, I needed to find a Windows 98 system. I had one.
Mm-hmm.
That's not audit. That's cursing with a lot of VMs.
Yes.
But for
I
company
imagine they pile up.
It wouldn't it be that a security audit would catch this? I mean, you can't be compliant unless you can prove that all your systems are patched and such, right?
Right.
Yeah, but I mean,
I mean,
I think
but you have to
the
do all your
mileage
systems, and
varies.
do you
Right.
have a really good inventory of all your systems?
Exactly where I was going, Larry.
We took that server and we decommissioned it so everybody take it off the list, but we really didn't decommission it. We just moved the users to a new one.
Well, logically, this is the sort of thing a security audit is supposed to catch. I mean, I don't know if it really does.
Well, I don't think we can seriously argue that with a straight face, but it's easy to overlook stuff.
I mean, there's on the studio network like maybe 50 devices, and I frequently lose track of what's on the network. That's 50 devices. Now take a large enterprise that has 10,000 servers. Never mind devices, 10,000 servers. You easily be like, oh, I forgot about like a couple hundred over there. Like, oops, forgot to turn off those VMs or whatever, right? Or we switched monitoring software, and when you're putting on new monitoring software, I'm not going to put it on the devices that are end of life and we're not supporting, but are still running for whatever because one person needed it at one time, so we had to spin it back up. And you lose track of stuff. It definitely happens.
And if they're sitting back on the back end network, not going through the load balancers and whatnot, maybe your scanning doesn't catch them because it's only looking at the public entry point. But then somebody starts tootling around the network on the backside, they find a gold mine.
Yeah, your BMC network. I think it was
Yeah.
Nico Waisman, right, that was talking about that. You get on the BMC network, and that's you find all the servers, right? If you've decommitted, even if you've turned it off, it might still be available on the BMC network, and then you can just turn it back on.
Right. So is that dirty laundry, or is that treasure trove, or gems?
It's like socks, Lee. When you have a sock drawer and you take out the sock drawer and you find all the socks that have fallen behind the drawer and are living like underneath the drawer. Those are
I thought they were behind the dryer. That's why.
Or behind the dryer. Yeah, that's one too, for sure.
See, in here, I thought you were talking about SOX compliance, but
no,
that's
not different socks.
altogether.
Different socks.
Different socks altogether.
Yep.
This is not the sock monkey.
It's not the sock you're looking for.
These are not the socks you're looking. Thank damn it.
I wish we'd have fun on this show.
I know, right? Oh, Larry, I wanted to hear about building a better SBOM. Is that like build back a better SBOM? Build better back?
Holler back?
Build better back better. Build better. Build better.
That's
S-bombs.
S-bomb, F-bomb, right?
Or an F-bomb.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of issues with software bill of materials. There's definitely some issues where it's a static document. Your software will evolve over time, so you need to pull that SBOM build into your CI/CD pipeline. So shifting left, but you should probably also shift right, so that you're actually generating an SBOM from the stuff you're actually shipping to customers or something of the like. So you've got to go that way. Also, there's all sorts of different ways which you can do it through SAST and DAST and IAST and binary SCA and multiple ways that you can assemble the data. Some of it's more accurate than others. Sometimes you need to do both. There's multiple formats between SPDX, Cyclone, DX. There's all sorts of complexities that are still going this. Go ahead,
being
Josh.
deprecated. SWID tags is being deprecated. That's the one you were looking for.
Yes, yeah. But you'll still find it in some open source products that will generate and so forth. There's some other ones too that I think is really interesting, which also goes very much along with my story number 13. Is there's very little attestation within an SBOM. Like, hey, you generated the SSBOM, but prove it. Like, there's no hashing algorithm to prove that it came out of this particular build process, and so
Right.
forth.
There's actually no attestation that it accurately reflects the software either.
Correct.
There's actually a company, Chris Blask is at Cybeats.
Mhm.
Their entire raison d'etre is to rip apart software, the binaries, create an SBOM out of it, and then look at the SBOM provided and go, really? You didn't list these things.
Yeah, that's where I see the better solutions going, is doing that comparison, and I think
see, Josh, I wasn't aware that Cybeats actually did the analysis. My understanding was that Cybeats really only does collection and comparison.
I don't know that they still do. I haven't talked to Chris in a few weeks, but and I think he actually might have moved to Trellix, but because that's what his RSA badge said. I saw on Facebook. But yeah, they at one point they had an analysis, a reverse engineering and analysis group that would rip binaries apart and actually analyze them to determine if the SBOM that the manufacturer provided you is correct and accurate.
Interesting.
That's the use case I like best with SBOMs, is doing that comparison. I think what I also like, kind of what Larry was talking about too, is like, how deep does the SBOM go? I think it should also speak to somewhat of your build process too, what tools you used to create that software. And I know Josh is going to go to
just in case the compiler that compiled the compiler that compiled the compiler now, that built the compiler for the compiler
in preparation for my presentation this weekend, I went and I read Reflections of Trusting Trust by Ken Thompson, August of 1984. It was volume 27, number 8 in Communications of the ACM. Did you know that paper is only 3 pages long?
What?
We've probably talked about it more than there's actually words in the article.
And Paul, it only took you a week to read it.
Quite possibly, you could spend a week analyzing it. That is how densely packed and smartly worded this paper is, of any other paper I think I've ever read in security. It is truly an astonishing read. I encourage everyone to go read it. I'll put a link in our internal Slack for it, because it legit is only 3 pages long, and he says something in there that I think, like, my favorite quote, which fits perfectly with my presentation I'm giving, is he says, "You can't trust code that you did not totally create yourself." I mean, there is the summation of the supply chain problem that we've laboriously talked about, on this show, and I think is a huge issue in our industry today. And he says, "No amount of source level verification or scrutiny will protect you from using untrusted code." Like the sentences he puts in there are like so thought provoking. So it's funny, Josh, we joke about this paper is truly amazing on so many levels.
Well, you know what? I've read it like 5 times, and every time I frigging read it, I read it again and I get more out of it. I love this fucking paper.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like. Did you see the part where he wrote Dennis Ritchie and he worked, Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie worked together, and he waxes poetic about what a wonderful collaboration it was, and he said the only time that we miscoordinated was when we wrote the same program and we wrote it character for character identical.
Yes. It's amazing.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing here is that, what the focus has been on is that we're identifying all the bits and parts, and that we're working, there's tools coming out there that, this is the build from this version at this point, that you got the build we know what's in it, but that doesn't mean it's worth a crap. It just means it's genuine. But we have this. Let's not go farther.
We have this spectrum, though, of I'm going to write every line of code in every piece of software that I run, and like I'll see in about 1,000 years when you
can't do that
recreated everything, right? But you go to the opposite end of the spectrum, where I'm just taking these globs of software with no scrutiny and just trusting everything, and that is really, really bad, because we've gotten to a point now in technology where we can do that. Docker is a great example of that. I can just go take some random Docker container, and good Lord, the supply chain of what put that Docker container together and how it's configured is frigging god awful. The answer is usually somewhere in between, right? And dependent on the application and, your risk tolerance, basically, in your threat model and, all those other factors.
I mean, you can only do so much analysis.
Well, Steve Gibson uses good practices and just writes everything in straight assembler. You can do that.
Right, but he probably uses an editor that was written by someone else and a compiler that was written by someone else, and then maybe uses Git software to commit it to GitHub, and all of those are part of the supply chain of that software in some capacity.
Well, if you're
Just
going to that level, then the whole world is involved in everything. I mean,
that's what I'm saying, Sam.
Yeah, but I don't think editors change the code. I think you can reasonably be confident that an editor has not changed your source code.
Or compromised your system. But it has. I mean, Visual Studio is really bad with plugins and stuff. Most editors are really bad. And we've covered articles where, the supply chain for those editors are.
Well, I think this would give you highly trustworthy software, about as trustworthy as you can get. I mean, you can never get the threat model, you can never get the attack surface down to zero.
No.
This would remove what I would think of as most supply chain attacks that it's like we talk about. I mean, those other things are basically like side channel attacks. So someone could get your office.
I think, Sam, what I'm suggesting is what I was suggesting earlier, that we make the attacker's job harder, that we provide a level of scrutiny or enact a level of scrutiny that makes it hard for attackers to slip in code or have a supply chain based attack in our software, right? We have to have some level of scrutiny to know that you have the threat model and go, if someone were to insert code, how would we know? I think Hal Pomerantz, when he came on the show, was talking about this too. Like, how would you know? And what assurances, what basically a root of trust are we building, and how do we validate that root of trust when we produce the software?
Yes, exactly. So is there a system or a product available that will provide some security there?
I think it's a collection of processes and tools based on how you develop software as a company, right? You have to come up with a methodology and processes that are then supported by tools. And that's going to be different. I mean, it depends on what software you're building. The process is different. The software is different. The languages are different. Packaging software is different. The deployment methods are different. So based on that, you have to adopt tools that allow you to have that level of integrity, a higher level of integrity than many have today. As we look at 3CX and others, right?
Well, I know when I used to work in the financial industry, we did large claim audits. You would choose what part of it is the most important and do a complete manual recalculation of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you mentioned supply chain attack, which kind of what my story 6 and 7 are about, which was what the hell was that loader that got loaded in that was part of the 3CX compromised? And other people have it too. The Xtrader.
It went deeper. It was Xtrader, yeah.
Yeah,
Xtrader was
downloaded that.
It was an app. So 3CX is interesting. I will talk about this on Sunday, right? But it's interesting because it was a supply chain attack that was then built upon by the first stage for another supply chain attack. So they attacked the Xtrader software in a supply chain sense, right? So that the developers of 3CX downloaded the Xtrader software, and from there they were able to compromise developer machines within 3CX, and then backdoor the software within 3CX. I thought that was a really interesting development lead. I'm glad you pointed out in that story.
And then Symantec just said, hey, we've got other companies that are in this same boat. 4 other organizations, 2 in the energy sector and 2 in the financial sector. And it makes sense. I mean, I don't think Xtrader was targeting 3CX. It was look, we're getting beacons back. Let's go get them.
Yeah, I think you're right, Lee. It's somewhat opportunistic, but I think to Sam's earlier point, right? If we're reducing dwell time and we're doing things like trying to ship more secure code, scrutinizing software before it ships, the attackers have to pivot and they have to go to different methods. And I think we're seeing a lot of the supply chain attacks be really successful for attackers to get around some of these, defensive mechanisms we're putting in place.
I think this attack is actually pretty cool that they pulled it off. I mean, it's kind of neat. A lot of patience. Also, I was thinking the whole SBOM, in terms of maturity, I was actually trying to find the Gartner hype cycle just because it would point it out that I think we're way at the beginning of where it needs to be. And I'm not saying stop. I'm not saying doom and gloom. I'm saying we haven't figured out how to make this really useful yet, to really internalize it and just run with the ball. We're figuring it out. And it's going to get exciting in a few years when we've really got this stuff going on. But in the meantime.
So a couple of things I wanted to bring up there. I think Lee mentioned that it was pretty cool how they came up with this the 3CX stuff. And I was trying to look for this story, but the current 3CX supply chain attack, from my understanding, based on this other article that I read, was they could only get the supply chain attack to happen this most recent time because of a previous supply chain attack that was undetected from 2 years prior.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the
what?
Yeah, the X-Trader thing was a couple years ago. It was like 2021 that they Trojaned it up, and it was actually an abandoned version that was still available for public download, and people were downloading it.
Yep.
We like supply chain attacks so much that we put a supply chain attack in your supply chain attack.
Supply chain attack, exactly. Speaking of supply chain attacks, Paul, if I may.
Yeah, please do.
My story number 13.
Salsa. Oh, you like a little salsa?
I love a little salsa.
Salsa with your chips.
Yep. Salsa 1.0 came out. I believe it was on Monday. And Salsa is the supply chain levels for software artifacts. To improve the integrity of software security architects throughout the software supply chain, leveraging SBOMs to help track those components as licenses and so forth. So SBOMs can really enhance Salsa. On the converse, Salsa can also enhance SBOMs because one of the big things with Salsa is verification and validation, as well as attestation with some cryptographic hashing methods. And currently, the SBOM stuff doesn't have any of that. However, what day was this? April 23rd, doesn't have a specific date. CISA actually released a paper describing the minimum requirements for the Vulnerability Exploit Exchange, or VEX, or enhancements to SBOM. And there's some components in there that note that VEX implementation must support digital signatures and encryption mechanisms. They should be signed and should identify themselves cryptographically using digital signatures. That's exactly what Salsa needs in an SBOM.
Right. So actually, I was going to ask you if you had any sense on when this would show up in some sort of standard or regulation to be required, because it's going to need some teeth to move forward, although it's very cool on its own.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit, was it SPDX 2.3 is currently out. Most folks are still supporting 2.2. And
SPDX 3.0 will be out in a few months.
Yeah, so this new stuff with the proposed enhancements from CISA is probably 2.4, 2.5, maybe even 3.0 sometime. So I think it's gonna be a bit, but I think we're moving in the right directions to have some of that documentation to help support some of the supply chain security.
I think it's some of the stuff that Kate Stewart was talking about when she appeared on the show earlier this year. And I think it speaks to validating the tool chain, right? She talked about that on her interview where I'm a developer and I'm using this tool chain and I've basically like cryptographically verified and told the world, like, I used this tool chain and I validated it and then I put it in an SBOM and then I sign it. Like, this is the software I use to compile and package my software. And then the second level to that is I'm attesting to the fact that this is the software I intended to publish.
Yeah, that's really Salsa 1.0.
Right,
I mean,
right.
Probably previous versions of Salsa, but Salsa 1.0 really puts the bow on making that happen.
And there are some open source projects doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of it. There's the embedded one. There's an embedded Linux.
Is that Zephyr?
Yeah, Zephyr. Thank you.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, I think Kate was talking, and Zephyr, I think, is, I believe, set up to do that, which I think is a model for, good Lord, if we could get all the IoT manufacturers to do something along those lines. Well, we also have to not shipping vulnerable code, too. Because there's like, someone else
Like
hasn't
that'll ever
modified,
happen.
like someone else hasn't modified my code, great, but you're shipping with a vulnerable kernel module or a vulnerable version of SSL or something, like that's bad.
But arguably you should pick that up as part of your SBOM, and enhancing that with some of the VDR, like comparing your SBOM software components to known CVEs and so forth. So
I feel like that should be table stakes, Larry, right?
What's that?
I feel like that should be table stakes.
Totally.
But I feel like as a developer, that helps me. I've talked about this when I was developing our Python application. I want to know as early as possible if there's a vulnerability in my code if I'm using a vulnerable library, so I can fix it before I incur so much technical debt that digging myself out of that technical debt is 10 times the work.
Right. Like,
Absolutely.
so just recently, the FDA is now in charge of so much more for the medical devices being submitted pre-market.
They can reject them based on security now.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's the refuse to accept.
Yes.
The initial submission.
Josh Corman did an interview somewhere, was talking, and props to Josh, man.
Yep.
Love you, man. Like, great work. It wasn't just Josh. You worked with multiple people, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So now as of I think October, the refuse to accept program goes in. So basically, if you're not submitting a CBOM, which is a hardware bill of materials and a software bill of materials with your device for pre-market submission, and not exhibiting due diligence, they're going to reject you. So it's in your best interest, like you're talking table stakes.
Yeah.
You've got a new device, have an SBOM compared to enhanced with VDR to see your CVEs, and remediate all that crap, because the FDA really wants security by design.
No one wants a Death Star with a thermal exhaust port vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if you're gonna take over the galaxy and destroy planets, you want to do that without being compromised.
Oh my God, you're awesome, dude. That's funny as hell.
Yeah.
I had a story that used that as an example.
Yeah, I was really sad the other day to see an email thread along the lines of who do we need to maintain this source code? It was a static code analysis application suite, and what came back was we're using this other product. It's like, no, we're not using that anymore. It was like, I was very sad. I'm like, what the hell, guys? How about what are we using now?
Yeah,
I wasn't in a position to comment.
But there's also a component of this too, where you bring your own vulnerability. I mean, and this is highly dependent on the environments you're attacking. But my story number 16. So the title was "Hackers Have Used Outdated Eval PHP WordPress Plugin to Deploy Backdoors."
Right.
But what they noticed was threat actors are using the eval PHP plugin to infect websites with backdoors. Right. So they're getting in by some means, and then installing a vulnerable plugin to give them expanded capabilities within there. So
Yep.
I targeted that as, I labeled that rather as, I put a backdoor in your Death Star, check the thermal exhaust port, right? Because that's how it got into the Death Star, was purposely introducing a vulnerability. I think this is kind of a similar example. Also it's similar to Black Lotus too, right? I'm just bringing my own vulnerable bootloader and putting it on the system. And since Secure Boot isn't kicking it out, I'm good, right?
Yeah, for some reason, that eval PHP plugin is still available through the mainstream WordPress plugin store.
Hasn't been updated. Did it say 11 months, Lee?
It hasn't been updated in a decade.
Yeah.
What?
10 years. It's got flaws in it, and so they found, okay, well, once we're in, we'll stick this in here and we'll do even more crap. But damn.
But that's
how about we pull it out of the plugin store?
Yeah, that's the danger of having an open market for this kind of stuff, is stuff can hang out there for 11 months and not be updated. If you're in a closed ecosystem, even with a Google or an Apple, certainly, I would imagine they have some diligence to go, if you've got a vulnerable app and it hasn't been updated in 11 months, we're yanking you out of the store. You're gone. I don't know exactly what their rules are on that, but they certainly have the capability to kick people out. But if it's an open thing like WordPress, anyone can write a plugin, anyone can put it on the internet, and anyone can install it. But also, that's one of the things that makes WordPress so great. It's why it's the most popular website platform, because you gain a bunch of this functionality that you don't have to code yourself. You've got hundreds of thousands of plugins to choose from that expand your capabilities on WordPress that you can acquire by just going install plugin. Done.
Yeah, and so that was also my story number 3, and your story as well. I had a link to the Security blog on it, but I was flashing back from what you're saying. I remember when a developer telling me, I don't write any code until I've searched the internet to see if it has already been written and I can just download it.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, he said that to me like 20 years ago. So it's an interesting trend that hasn't changed.
For sure.
Actually, it's gotten easier, I think. But now we got to make sure that code's okay. That'll happen.
Or make sure it's being updated. That's the harder part.
Yeah.
My story number 7 was, this was a presentation at RSA from George Kurtz, CEO of CrowdStrike, and someone else from CrowdStrike, that was malware-free cyber attacks. If that isn't an RSA headline right there, very sensationalized. But I think this is really just a living off the land. I mean, it's something I think we've called living off the land for a long time. Basically, the attack, from what I gathered from the article, the attack that CrowdStrike is describing is basically based on real world events, but social engineering to get credentials and using those credentials to install legitimate software to compromise the network. Attackers don't really need to install malware. They just need utilities that provide them functionality. And if those utilities that provide an attacker functionality aren't malware, they're legitimate software, it makes it much harder to detect. But I don't think there's anything necessarily new, as we've talked about living off the land attacks for a long time. Now, typically that may be software that already exists, great, but if it's not, attackers can install it and just use it. I think they were talking about any Connect, any something. What was the software? So I didn't think it was anything new, but also it's still challenging if you're relying on EDR. So they said, instead of relying on, nope, that's the wrong article. When it comes to defending the enterprise, EDR and other malware detection tools aren't terribly useful against malware-free cyber attacks. There's simply no malicious code to detect, which I thought was interesting coming from CrowdStrike. But of course, EDR, the reason we have the EDR is they're collecting more than just, or they're not just detecting malicious code. They're also analyzing the behavior of the device, which is then on you to determine if that is an event that you need to pay attention to. Which, again, nothing new.
Yeah.
EDR is turning into the new workplace monitoring system.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much it is.
And all of the work from home people are, well, because I'm one of them. I work from home and have for the last 10 years. Roughly 10 years. God, that's true. Wow. Are like, why are you watching me? What do you, and all the mid-level managers in the offices are like, we must have you in the office to get productivity out of you. I'm sorry. You make me commute somewhere, all the productivity is sucked out by the joys of the commute. Okay. Let's be clear on this. And so they put monitoring software. I've actually had questions about monitoring software, and I'm like, I won't answer that. There is such a thing as employee monitoring software. If you want to Google it, that's the word to look for, employee monitoring software. That's as far as I go.
Yeah.
But the problem is EDR is collecting so much.
Insider threat detection software used to do this. And there was a company, they were sponsored for a while and they got bought. I can't think of the name of it. But they had a lot of safeguards to basically, if you're going to employ a system like that, Josh, what I gathered in talking to, the name of the company escapes me. But because I would ask them specifically about this, and it was very much an intention of the monitoring software company to provide auditing of the people that use it to, as best they could, not allow people to cross the line of creepy spying versus detecting for insider threat or malicious activity that is occurring. Right. And it was very, very purposeful. And I thought they did a great job of doing that. Eventually they got acquired. I can't think of the name of that company now, but that's what made me think of it as we were talking about this, is that's the kind of monitoring that you need to do. Also, it's kind of also riddled in false positives too. Like, because people do stuff in their normal everyday work using legitimate tools that could easily be labeled as, did that person just use SSH to transfer a file or connect to another system, or is that someone who's using SSH maliciously? Because as I found, you can just enable SSH on Windows, which I didn't know because I'm not a Windows user. I'm a Linux desktop user. It's in my contract that I disclose that to everyone as often as I can. So, but I'm like, in Windows, I'm like, how would it? I just want SSH. I'm like, oh, you just enable it. Like, it just installs. I'm like, cool. Now it's there. Right. But I could also see that as, if I were an attacker, I'd be like, I kind of want to enable and use that because it's legitimate software that runs on Windows. It's signed. It's cool. And how do you differentiate the two?
And that's actually a really good point. I mean, remember we had I know I'm going off topic, I'm sorry, but I remember we had the discussion about open source tooling, which was that these tools can be used for good or bad, evil or good. And a lot of the same tools that are used for system administration, that are used for technical support, that are not just used for pen testing, but they're used for very, very legitimate purposes, can also be used for good or ill. And so do you allow, and some of them are built in, what's built into Linux is curl and wget and do you know what I mean? So you can have all these tools that are very, very legitimate, have incredibly legitimate uses that can be used for really evil shit. TeamViewer literally today just changed their entire model of how they do business and the technical model of their software, because some of the complaints they were getting was that scammers were using it. And they were. And they use AnyDesk and they use TeamViewer.
AnyDesk, that's the one, AnyDesk.
Oh, is that the software you were talking about?
No, but I don't know. They were a sponsor on the show and then they got acquired. Is it Code 42? I think I was trying to... It's hard because they got acquired. So, but they were one name, and then they changed to a different name, and then they got acquired. Which, God, I'm old. And I can't remember anything anymore. Someone out there, someone's yelling it because they remember. Who's
well, no, we're not live.
Adrian,
Doesn't matter. Our listeners are yelling it in the car while
Yeah.
they're listening to us.
if Adrian were here, he would, because you know what it is? Adrian also took over Enterprise Security Weekly, where I would talk about that every week, but now Adrian does that show, so I forget a lot of
It's
things.
not Spectre Ops, is it?
It's not Spectre Ops, no.
Okay, then I don't know.
It'll come to me. Like after we've recorded the episode and we
You're going to
come
be
back
on the toilet with a phone.
tomorrow
or a
morning,
tablet. And then all of a sudden you'll be like, son of a bitch!
And it's on the tip of my brain too. And I can't think of it. Anyway, talk about something else and it'll come to me. Oh, let's talk about secret keys. Yes. I loved it. I love to hate
Which
this.
story is that?
Oh my God. My story number 8, Apache Superset. Insecure default configuration in Apache Superset. So I know this and I recognize this because the application that we lovingly refer to as PPWorks is written in Flask. And I remember when I was like the only developer for that application for a year and a half, 10,000 lines of Python. That was awesome. I loved the experience. It was great. I learned a lot. And I also learned, one of the things I learned about Flask is that it keeps a secret key. And that key is used for session management and session
Dear God,
separation.
seriously?
And this article did a great job of explaining it in words that are way better than how I would explain it. When a user logs in, the web application sends a session cookie that includes a user identifier back to the end user's browser, right? Go to the application the first time, I log in, application sends a session cookie with my user identifier in it. Great. The web application signs the cookie with a secret key. Is a value that is supposed to be randomly generated and typically stored in the local configuration file. You as the Flask developer must choose a preferably long random string of characters that represents your secret key. You need to store that in the configuration of your Flask application. With every web request, the web browser sends the signed session cookie back to the application. The application then validates the signature on the cookie to re-authenticate the user prior to processing the request. So here's what happens. In Apache Superset, there's a default value for the secret key in the Flask application. The documentation says, hey, you should change this key because everyone shouldn't have the same secret key. Otherwise, I can just impersonate anyone's session. Excuse me, which is exactly what happened. So what did they find? There's a number in here of how many.
You could frickin' do this exploit in a class, Larry.
Yep.
Totally. And even better, in January of 2022, they rotated that default value to a new default value.
Mm-hmm.
No. Yep.
All right. Here's the stats now based on now we all understand how the secret key works in Flask. A basic search for superset instances produced 3,390 results, of which 3,176 appeared to be really superset instances, as opposed to fake ones, I guess. And these 3,176 instances, we found that 2,124, roughly 67%, were using one of the 4 default keys.
Hang on 1 second. I need to beat my head against the desk violently for about 5 solid minutes.
That is a high percentage of people that basically didn't change the default password.
Hey, Larry, do me a favor. Is there any course that you teach where you do some of the fundamentals or the CIS top 20 or the OWASP top 20 or anything like that? In any of those courses, is the term change your default passwords part of that course?
In my courses that I've authored and I teach, maybe just a little bit. It's certainly around the IoT stuff and potentially some of the wireless stuff. But
we see this in IoT.
Some courses that's there.
Yeah, we see this in IoT though.
All the time.
Backdoor accounts. You know, the backdoor account that gets embedded in the firmware. It's the same for everyone. The key, people use the same key, or firmware uses the same key.
I thought that was Larry's Pornhub account.
Hey now.
Sorry, I couldn't
different
resist.
account. Different account.
Hey now. I'm at home. Shh.
We also see it in web applications on IoT devices. Speaking of backdoors, one of my favorite IoT attacks, which is Joel's backdoor, whereas if you set your user agent string to, what was it? Was it Joel's back door? Oh God,
Yeah, I
now
think
I'm
so.
testing my memory again. Was it Joel's back door backwards? It was something like that. I think it was Joel's back door backwards. If that was your user agent, you were magically authenticated to the web interface. Awesome. Love that attack. I think it was Joel's backdoor spelled backwards as your user agent, right?
So yeah, the amusing part, if you put the reverse edit for 04882 Joel : backdoor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So to answer your question, Josh, yes, we see this. Unfortunately,
I know.
a lot.
Look, how many?
Yeah.
Do you know how many freaking Windows Server instances / SQL? Okay, I'm going to bring you back 5 or 10 years. What's the password for SQL on 90% of servers? MS SQL.
Oh crap! What was it?
2 letters.
SA.
SA.
Yes.
How many times
It
did
was
you see
all
that
I
when you
could
did a
do
pen
not to
test?
say Scott Tiger. That was the Oracle default.
Oh
Yeah.
right.
No, I know, but I mean, like, the fact that we have these memorized because they were burned into our brain from typing them in so many damn times. Change your default passwords everywhere. And now let's stop for a second. Let's back up. With the Legoization of software, with the modularization of software, how many places do we need to change default passwords? How many places do we not even know we need to change default passwords? So I'm not going to blame people entirely, but I'm going to tell them that you better check every module, every Lego, every piece, every library, every application.
What I like though is when you configure software like this Flask application, where the required fields that you have to figure out and choose a value are commented out. So if I were to address this issue in Superset, right, I would ship the software with the configuration file. I would comment out the Flask secret, and I would put no value after it, and I would say you have to put a value there. So you'd have to go into the config file, uncomment it out, and put a value in for your secret key.
I think they did you one better or equivalent, because they, with the version 2.1 of Flask, it will not start if you have a default secret in there. It won't even start up. You have to set it.
What's a default secret though?
Well, it's one of the ones that's provided. Those you've got to put your own in there. It knows what the defaults are.
I
think
gotcha.
that's. But if you're
Now,
using
that's
one,
a smart move.
yeah. So I think that will help. It's the same idea though as Paul's. Unless you take action, the thing ain't going to freaking work. So you're not going to shoot yourself in the foot. That's the right way to do it. Yeah.
Well, we
help themselves.
We see Raspberry Pi, right? Raspbian doing similar kind of things, just going, there's no default. I think we've talked about this. We shouldn't be talking about this anymore. People should know not to use defaults. Right, Larry? How long have we been talking about this?
A long time.
Larry, what's the default password on a WRT 54G?
Admin.
My defaults are, because it varied on version and what firmware, it's admin, no password. It's admin.
And yep.
And then on some of them, like root and then Tor, or root and no password, or admin and no password. No password.
How long has it been since you've touched a WRT 54G?
A long time.
And you still remember?
Define touched exactly, like physically or tried to log into one.
Not sexually. Okay, let's be clear. But we've all seen the picture of you in the mankini. Okay, just
That's a different unpublished section of the book.
Yes,
the family show.
But no. I mean, like, okay, tried to log into one.
It's been a long time.
All right, and you still remember the passwords. That's how many times you used the damn things. That's how long we've been talking about this.
If you leave it the default, then you it's harder to forget your password because you can just look it up, right?
Yeah. You look it up on the internet. It's right there.
That's valid, but only when you have stacks of 20 of them and you can't set each one to a different password for 50 characters because you'll drive yourself nuts. I get that. That's like when you're setting up virtual machines. You're like, okay, I'm going to set up 6 of them to do this, and this. and you leave it as like, the same password for all 6, and it's 2 characters or whatever.
I know.
But I'll change them later.
This is how we get hacked. This is how we got hacked when I described it was stupid passwords.
Do you remember the MIT project for password security where knowing the password you couldn't log in because they had set the passwords on all their machines to Mr. Root? But the point was that you couldn't get in just because you had the password. You had to do more to get in. Was that part of Kerberos, Hesiod? One of those. Anyway, I just thought that was a really good model. Sure, having that default password is fine, but that's not going to let you in. It's got to be more than that. Too soon? I don't know.
Never too soon.
Never too soon.
I was just I can remember what it was. Damn it.
Well, I mean, there's also I forgot to authenticate the user. My story number 11 is kind of similar to that, although not really. It's a variation of I forgot to authenticate the user. It's an interesting segue from default passwords. It was a Gary McGraw interview that he was describing bugs versus bugs versus a flaw, right? Bug is I've got a memory corruption. A flaw is I forgot to authenticate the user. And Papercut, which apparently is printer management software. I'm not familiar with Papercut. It is printer management software. CVE 2023-27350 was an oops in session handling, where essentially they didn't forget to authenticate the user, but like they authenticated the anonymous user and those credentials were valid from, I understand it. And it might be slightly off on that description, but that's like basically the way I understand it. You can read more about the flaw. It's the label for it is called session puzzling, right? Where like you basically in your application have authenticated a session and then someone can take over that session without any impedance, essentially. So, and this is very much a logic flaw. Like when you read the description of this and go through and read the article and read the technical details, you kind of get the sense that this is a logic flaw that's these are the hardest flaws to detect because again, it's not something you can scan your code and go, oh, I'm using stir copy, there's a buffer overflow. This is in the logic of the code to go, well, no, if you start up in setup mode, like you never disable those credentials and people can use them because you don't invalidate them once setup is complete, which is also kind of roughly what I think was happening here. And that's hard to detect. So they say this function is normally called throughout the software only after a user has had their password validated through the login flow. However, in the routine, they call it setup completed flow. The logic accidentally validates the session of the anonymous user. It's called session puzzling. It's pretty awesome. Right. That was Papercut. And again, I don't understand the Papercut software, what it's actually used for, because I only read about the vulnerability.
Okay.
It's some kind of I don't pretend to know what it is. Some kind of print stuff.
So I had a story I thought might get your attention, Paul, and that was my number 2, which was at This Week at RSA, MIT and Stanford are announcing operating system that instead of being everything's a file.
Yes, it's a database.
It's a database. Everything, the table, a database.
I've listened to a podcast about this, ironically enough. We're on a podcast, and I listened to a podcast about this.
Wait a minute. Didn't Microsoft try this before?
I don't know.
I did. This isn't the. You're right, Larry. I felt like it wasn't the first time researchers had attempted this.
Like, I thought that was supposed to be like the miracle of not Windows 2000, what came after?
Vista? Windows ME?
No, it was probably Vista or something
8?
of the like Windows 10 or Windows 8 or something like that. Like, I thought that was supposed to be the miracle that everything was going to be a database.
I think there's been a lot of
OS2 Warp.
Could
Oh.
I think there's been a lot of tries at getting operating systems to be transactional like a database.
Right. And
The concept of that many tables in an operating system fills me with dread.
Yeah, but
Like
that's
existential dread.
read the research paper,
No.
Josh, because that's the problem that they were basically trying to solve. It's how do I design an operating system, or more accurately, design a database that can support an operating system and access that many tables. And that was basically the premise of the research. Was the people who designed it, who were like, one guy was like a database engineer, right, Lee? It was like a deep, like, PhD computer scientist database person. It's basically like, no, if you were to do a database, this is how you do it. And they had like amazing performance on it from what they claim.
Right. Well, I think part of the difference between your OS2 Warp or whatever it was, or maybe even Oracle's raw iron that was basically a database running on the raw hardware, is the resources you can get in a computer are so much greater,
Yes.
20 years later, that you maybe have the capacity to do it. And also what we know about running a database has advanced a bit too. I'm still worried about what multi-stage rollback. I mean, think about it.
It's a multi-stage rollback. So basically you're saving all of the state of your operating system in the database. And if you succumb to a ransomware attack, recovering is simply rolling back the database to a previously known state, and it rolls everything back.
It's ACID compliant in the old terms. But I mean, like, look, we have professional DBAs and they still get dirty data like crazy in databases.
Oh, yeah.
This thing would have to be so tolerant of dirty data and so be so self-healing. It's not even funny.
I just think it's exciting. I don't know how well it'll work. I mean, there would be none of that. I forgot to turn on logging for fill in the blank because it'd all be there. But, you could run out of space.
Shit.
You still could get bad. You could get corruption.
Oh shit! No, Lee, think about it. This is where this is to make your operating system cloud-based. All of your former states will go up to the cloud. It'll be a subscription database operating system.
Whoa. Whoa. Mind blown. Why didn't we buy in on this? Where do we invest?
Yeah, it's a pretty it's really interesting. You should take a look at it. It's super, super interesting.
To bring back up that little bit of history, yes, Microsoft did try to create a database-based file system.
Mm-hmm.
It was called WinFS,
Yep.
and it was planned for inclusion initially in Windows Vista, otherwise known by its codename as Longhorn. In 2003, but in 2004 they announced that WinFS would not ship with Windows Vista because of massive performance issues.
Vista had performance issues without databases. Jesus Christ!
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but also think about the incident response. If you're tracking everything that happens in the operating system in a database down to that level, incident response is pretty easy. So basic comparison of of the tables.
Oh shit! This DBoS thing natively supports large-scale distributed applications in the cloud. It's designed to be cloud native.
Yeah.
I'll put the website in our
crazy
Slack channel.
Is this the DBoS project?
Yes, DBoS. Yep.
Yeah.
Database-oriented operating system.
Yes.
And if you change the first two letters, it's BDOS. Whether the DOS is for disk operating system or denial of service, you pick.
Da-da-dum. Anyway,
provenance tracking. It sounds like they're doing it in blockchain.
It has some similarities. I think the interview actually asked that. I can't.
Provenance tracking? Did you say?
Provenance tracking. Yeah.
Isn't that also the new feature that GitHub introduced? So you knew more about. They actually were doing signed bills, and they called provenance. Where you have
That's because they do Merkle tree analysis in GitHub. It is blockchain. It's just primitive blockchain using Merkle trees. That's all.
Whoa, scary close.
The version control in GitHub is blockchain.
Okay,
it's a form of blockchain, I should say.
It's cool. I just didn't realize that. It's cool.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you.
No. GitHub does the Merkle trees, chaining them together in blocks. It technically is full blockchain. It's not called that because it's built into it's a subroutine in GitHub, but it is a full blockchain. Somebody will probably tell me I'm wrong, but it's close enough.
I wish I could
That's
credit
awesome.
the podcast I heard about the database operating system on. I can't find it. It's one of the ones I
Oh,
listened
This
to.
is
good.
really cool.
Yeah.
I will have to play with this.
It'd be interesting to see what it can do and what will work on it. I mean, like I said, and I remember there was when they first introduced the journaling file systems, we were hoping that would make rollback easier and better, and it kind of did, but didn't. But I'm thinking here we go on steroids. So let's see. At least I remember using JFS in
There's
some
some
operating
there's some
systems.
file system things. I was talking to my friends who are going to come on the show, talking about using ZFS for incident response. People are using is it BetterFS? BetterFS.
BetterFS. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
BetterFS for
This
for
is
similar
they want to
things.
hold the entire database that's the operating system in memory.
Yes.
They want to run this as effectively a flash operating system.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's really
Oh,
cool.
man.
I
I'm
will
remembering
invest in this
conversations
company.
about what if we could keep everything in memory all the time? How fast would it be?
Oh, well, I know people that keep Oracle in memory, large databases in memory, and it's insanely fast.
Yes, it is. You just have to remember to synchronize it to non-volatile storage from time to time.
Details.
I know. I know.
And then you got
Fast
to change the
non-volatile
default
storage at
passwords
that.
too.
We talked about some old operating systems, but we didn't mention IBM's AIX.
Okay.
I think we're about to.
There are some vulnerabilities in AIX. One sounds like it could be really sneaky. So it says the same configurable mechanisms by which error daemon handles events to be written to dev error could also be used by adversaries to construct a persistence mechanism, with error daemon being configured to perform malicious activities when appropriately constructed message is logged by a user. The full context is in the article, but that part seemed kind of sneaky, that you could basically escalate privileges to put your code somewhere that kind of gets picked up later by a daemon that's responsible for error handling and logging. My larger question was also, like, who's still using AIX out there? Is it still? Obviously it's still out there.
Many financial institutions, many large
I
institutions.
knew Josh was going to say that.
Like,
Josh was gonna say that.
dude, I found a company recently. I was on a call with them, and I'm like, okay, so what type of mainframe do you have? They're like, we just got rid of it. I'm like, and it was a large financial institution. I can't talk about it, and I'm like, what, you don't have a mainframe? And they're like, it took 12 years and $500 million for them to recreate all of the stuff that was running on the mainframe, but they did it and they got rid of it. They just decommissioned it and got rid of it. And by the way, I had that call like a week or two ago. They got rid of it 3 or 4 months ago. Okay.
And they moved it to AIX?
What was the mainframe? Yeah. Can you define that?
It was
What did they mean by mainframe?
I don't remember. It had a RACF database. It had to be a big iron. I don't remember what it was.
OS3.
So you're probably talking OS 360?
OS3.
Probably.
390?
Yeah, that's my guess.
OS 390 or OS 360? Those are both
360 or 390. One of
those
the
are both mainframe operators. It's been a while. Wow.
Yeah.
Or the older VM. You know,
Mhm.
their virtual machine language.
Mm-hmm.
God, it's been a
We
long
had one
time.
of those. I was at university. We went from VM to OS 390.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Would be an upgrade path for that.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've got OS 400, AS400, right? Which is
But
kind of
those
like
were AIX boxes.
No, those were OS 400.
No,
Yeah,
you're
it was
right.
a separate
Right,
operating
right.
system.
Sorry.
But that wasn't like a full mainframe kind of level. That was like more your
No.
mini computer, which is an older terminology level. But AIX has always been completely separate. Like that's if you wanted a Unix environment.
You wanted an IBM branded Unix, AIX was what you wanted.
Right. It wasn't a bad operating system. I worked with it back in the day. It was pretty cool.
Absolutely.
I'd venture to guess there's probably still some ICS organizations in healthcare that probably still have some AIX.
Oh, I'm sure they do. They've
So,
probably been running for years.
I found this article because I was a little curious about AIX in January of this year. The source is osnews.com, which I didn't validate. But they say, speaking to IBM's, they call it AIX, IBM's legacy proprietary Unix.
Okay.
IBM recently, they reported in January that IBM has moved the entire AIX development group to IBM India, to their Bangalore office, and placing 80 US-based developers into redeployment. They put redeployment in air quotes. Not sure what that means. So they say it's a fairly craven way of replacing layoffs with musical chairs, requiring the displacement developers to either find a new position within the company, possibly relocating as well, within some unspecified period, or to retire. That's a very IBM thing to do. It's hey, we're closing this down, shipping your job off somewhere else or whatever, and you're going to find a new position within the company, or you're going to retire. I mean, it's basically a layoff without a layoff, right? So they said the writing's on the wall for all the remaining commercial Unix variants. They said by this point, the work being done on AIX and HP's UX is maintaining the install base and fulfilling support contracts, after which there's no real reason to keep these platforms going. So it sounds like if you're on those, what we'll call legacy Unix variants, AIX, HP, UX, you gotta start moving away, because they're in just basically like basic support mode of these.
The killer on those OSs is they were rock solid.
Mm-hmm.
They could run for frickin' years without crashing.
But to your point, Lee, that's how they designed them, from the essentially the ground up. I mean, maybe not the ground up, but just after the ground level, when they designed it, it was designed to be rock solid and just run.
Right.
It
was designed at length to be rock solid and run. They designed it to be true multi-user, to be true multi-transaction, to be true multi-everything.
Right. Yes.
And they were designed to never, ever fucking fail.
And designed for a specific set of hardware. And you contrast that to the Linux kernel, which is designed to be everywhere. Everyone's everything on all this different hardware, and they have to support that.
Yeah. It's, if you're running on proprietary hardware, it's a completely different world. I mean, add VMS to that list, by the way. Same thing. If you're designing
OpenVMS is still going, It's funny you say that.
Yeah, I know it is.
It's still going. They just added support for UEFI or something like that. Not secure boot, but for UEFI. So it can UEFI can boot OpenVMS. Isn't that crazy?
I love it. It is. And that's a real-time OS too.
Yeah, VMS
control systems use it.
Awesome operating
system.
system.
Used to use it.
Yeah.
But I gotta say though, I can't believe how far Linux has gotten into everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know if you remember back in the early '90s when it first showed up, and you're going, "What the hell is this?"
Like,
this
oh,
new
how
kid on
cute.
the block?
Yeah, because in the '90s, it was still, if it was a business application, it was running on what we now call those legacy Unix variants. It was Solaris, it was AIX, it was HPUX, or I mean, back in the day, it was DEC Alpha, Compact Bot. It was DEC Alpha was what we used to run. In the early days when I worked for a lottery company, we had the standard system was VMS ran the back end for the lottery, and it was DEC Alpha that ran some of the other systems and services.
Was that VMS or OSF1?
It was VMS. It was VMS.
Right.
It was basically the brains of the lottery, because it was rock solid. It was transactional.
Did we wrap it before Mr. Josh has to drop?
We should wrap it. I don't know if I had one or two more stories to hit quick. Oh, I did want to just quick hit the ghost token. 0-day bug let hackers create invisible Google accounts. I'm just really glad they fixed this because this could have gotten out of hand. I mean, essentially inside your Google account, someone could create an app that was invisible to you but had full access to your Google account.
Right.
Oh God.
So it's a
It
good
had a
reminder,
state-
like read this article and then go to your Google accounts, because you probably have more than one, and go into the application settings and go look at what has access to your account and go delete. I did this today, but delete. I'm like, what is that? I don't get rid of all that stuff because you collect a lot of cruft in there, and that's not something you go look at all the time.
And then his sex toy stopped working.
Well, yeah, because it needs access to your Google so it can email you and software updates and all that kind of stuff.
Push
Microcode software
notifications.
updates. You got to have the software updates
That's
for all
right.
the toys.
So basically, the app disappears because it's in a pending deletion state, but it's not actually been deleted.
Correct.
And the attacker can flip it in and out of that state to execute it.
Mm-hmm.
So the change is to make it visible in that one page only, the apps with access to your account page.
Yeah, and that's the only place you can disable apps. So if it's not there and you can't disable it, you're screwed. That's the only place you can do that.
Good on Google.
I'm glad they fixed
Crazy
it.
attack.
That would have been abused horribly.
Yeah.
Hopefully it hasn't been.
Yeah, knocking on wood or whatever this desk is made out of.
Right.
Simulated wood grain.
Oh, I saved
Real simulated wood grain.
most important story, my story number 2. Apple slices Bitcoin Manifesto out of latest macOS beta. That's like the perfect headline for this ridiculous story too.
Yes, this one was bizarre.
Bizarre that it was there.
Bizarre.
They included the Bitcoin Manifesto. Satoshi's paper was on every Mac, and someone found it, and then now Apple's like, no, we got to take it out. No, we can't have any fun. Apple's not about fun. We can't have fun. This is not about fun.
It's been there for years.
Mm-hmm.
This reminds me of the iTunes EULA that had you cannot use iTunes to create nuclear weapons. That was back in 2000 and something.
Damn it.
Damn, it's there. Holy shit.
It is there. If you copy that command, system library image capture devices virtual scanner .app contents resources simple doc.pdf. That's your Satoshi paper right there.
Somebody had to be laughing like mad, get that past all the reviews to have it still be there.
Someone got pulled into an office and be like, so I understand that you included the Bitcoin paper in every single Mac user. Care to explain yourself? Fun is not allowed here at Apple, okay? We're going to remove that in the next beta. You've been warned. That person probably works for Google now or whatever.
So we should watch for manifestos in GCP.
That's right. Yes. Wherever the manifesto shows up next, that's where the person went. Anyway, that was one of my silly stories for the week. I don't know why that got so much attention, but it did.
It's weird.
So there you have it. It's weird. I'm just sad they took it out. I thought it was kind of cool. I think they should have left it, but, who am I to say? Well, thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. We'll see you next time. Larry, take us out.
Over and